Right, that should be an action for us. So welcome to the webinar, How to Pitch Ideas for Publication and Writing Effective EOIs and Abstracts. And the webinar today is especially geared to putting in EOIs and abstracts for the Coolamon Journal, but we are also really hoping that the material from today's webinar gives transferable skills, so stuff that you can apply to other journals, other publications and things like that too. So without further ado, I shall just bring up our PowerPoint for today. Get that onto our full slide display. And Barry, I will just hand over to, Cecily, actually, I'll hand over to you, Cecily, and you're going to introduce for us and then move to Barry.
Yes, just to say who we are. Rena, Cecily and Barry. Our editorial team, there's 4 of us. So Christine couldn't be with us today. So just to say who we are. And as Rena mentioned, this is to be a resource for the website. So thank you, Rena.
And Barry.
Just a brief welcome to country. And since we're from a lot of different areas, please take a moment to consider where you are living now and remember the people who over many generations and thousands of years came before. Like us, they had to face the ups and downs of their location and way of life, and the relationships spawned thereby. Some of those relationships would have been fraught, but the relationship of first peoples to the land tended to be healthy, wholesome, energizing, and respectful. Respectare, to look again more deeply. Such coming to realize that the spiritual and the material are one, not uniformity, but unity, leads to growth and wisdom, where people come to realize themselves fully. May we take this ancient example to heart, so that in our living, writing, and relationships, we will bring together, not push apart, living lives of love, justice, mercy, and peace. Amen.
Thanks, Barry. Right, I'll hand over to you, Cecily.
Thank you, Rena. So as you can see, this is the cover of our last edition of Coolamon. And we just want to take a moment to sort of say this is really at the heart of whether we're doing an expression of interest or putting in an abstract, that we think of the journal as it's intended to be, as a carrier of wisdom. And so that no matter whether we're writing a poem, a reflective piece, or an academic article, that wisdom is the common denominator for all of that. So, okay, so I think, did anyone want to say anything at this point? Because this is meant to be rather informal, and hopefully we offer something of value to all of you today. So did anyone wish to say anything just at this point before we move on? Thanks, Rena. For the next slide, that'd be great. So what's the purpose of writing an expression of interest and writing an abstract? So just to alert you to the fact that as a team, we have needs. So this is not all about for you today, which we hopefully, as I said, there'll be experienced people. For some of this that you might be a bit ho-hum, but for some of the newer people, we might be able to offer some really significant insights. So just to remember that we're working as a team. So when people submit something, We have needs as an editorial team. So the purpose of writing an expression of interest and an abstract, yes, it does assist the writing process, it can. But we editors have planning that we have to do. We have all these submissions come in and so if we get abstracts in, we know ahead of time how this journal is going to roll. And then there's the design team. So it's not just about the editors. So we send the abstracts to the design team, so ahead of time they can start thinking about how the expressions of interest or the abstracts that we've accepted will work together. So we'd like you to keep that in mind when we're offering you these ideas today. So it's really about, for the editors, but also for the people submitting, the authors, it's about an alignment with the theme and the contribution to the goals of the journal. Thanks, Rena.
Great.
Yes, we're getting there now. So, okay. So the expressions of interest refer to the poems and the reflective essays. And the abstracts refer to academic articles. And hopefully by the end of what we do together today, everyone will be able to see there's a real difference in that. And this is why I say it's wisdom in each of these genres that pulls it all together. Thanks, Rena. Okay, so looking at a poem, what would an expression of interest look like? Well, probably somewhere between 75 and 150 words, doesn't have to be too big. In fact, even if it's not 75, as I've started to outline, we have needs that need to be covered, and so long as those needs are covered. So yes, there's a proposed title, yes, there's keywords, and yes, there's some background. So in order to make this clarified a little bit more, we're going to look at a poem that was in a couple of journals ago. Thanks, Rena, if you would. And I'd like you to just take a minute to just read the poem. Next slide, Rena, please. Okay, so here's an example of what an expression of interest would look like. So yes, we know the title is Prism, and the keywords we suggest could be Rainforest Creek, Mystery, Watery Prism, Afternoon. And then some of the background might be the proposed poem describes an experience of thin space, a liminal experience of divinity, or you could say something like an experience when nature brings the divine and the human together. You know, so it's not just set in stone, it can be how you, what the impetus is and how you describe what it is you're trying to express. Do we have any questions at this point? Okay, so let's move on. Thanks, Rena. Okay, so now with a reflective essay, what we need is a summary, somewhere between 100 and 200 words. Okay, so it can begin with a paragraph that places your message in some sort of context for us, and then discuss the background of the subject and what the goal will be of the essay that you're going to write. And your message, you can describe some books that you can be referring to. That's usually helpful for us too. Or you can actually describe the completed activity if you're up to that point. So, you know, it just depends on what point of development in your thinking where you are. So it's just to give us some ideas, but just remember, if you're describing books, please don't let the book speak. Let your voice speak, and let the referred book, what the books you're referring to, just support what you're saying, just to give us a flavour. So in using books, don't let that detract from your voice and what your message and what you're trying to say. So, and ending with a statement about the scope of it, and most importantly, the hopes you have for the content of your essay. And here you'll start to see a defining difference between poems, reflective essays, and academic abstracts. So let's move on now to the academic. Oh, we're going to look at the useful tools. That's right. So for people who are not used to doing reflective work, I think most of us are, but to write a summary sometimes is very different to how you just do personal reflections. And so there are some questions you can ask yourself to help your thinking develop. And we've also put in here a reflective cycle. And look, Google is our friend in all of this, let me remind you. So anything that we've given you today can be Googled and can be extended. And of course, you can always come back to the editorial team with your questions. But this reflective style starts with a description. What happened, when and where did it happen? Then on to the feelings. You know, how did you feel about that? How did others feel about it? And then the evaluation. What did you and others do, and what was the outcome of the situation? And what did you want to have happen is the conclusion, number 4. And number 5, did you want to offer a solution, or did you want to offer a hope? What is it? Was your the action a hope that you had for the content? Do we have any questions here, or perhaps you might put them in the chat box if you do have them?
I have a question.
Please go ahead. Is it Frank?
Frank here, yes. Point 4, conclusions. I note that you put down what did you want to happen. You haven't mentioned what actually did happen.
Well, what was the, yes, what did you and others do?
Yeah, what they did, what's the consequence of what they did?
Yeah, what was the outcome of the situation, the event or the issue?
Okay, my apologies then, thank you.
That's fine. This is what this is about. Please, I love the questions. They really help me, but it really helps me that, yeah, it's there. But even if it wasn't, this is about refining our processes, because this is the first time that we've actually done this. And please, for the editorial team, it's always a work in progress, and that you're part of this. So, you know, we're really grateful that all of you have come today to help us and help other people in the future to know what our needs are. And of course, our needs always change because our times change, and the accelerated pace of how we're living and working means that our needs will change very quickly. So this won't be the first and last webinar on this. So thank you. Thanks, Frank, for your input there. Okay, so let's now move on to the academic abstract. And this, you'll see, is very different to the expression of interest and the for the poem and for the reflective essay, or for an interview. Like, this is not, those expressions of interest are not only for the ones named, because we're extending and expanding. As I said, we're a work in progress, and we're actually extending all the genres now. And you'll see over time that will develop. But for the moment, let's contain it to what we're doing today. So when we're looking at an academic abstract, so very simple questions can start with, well, what's your paper about? Why is it important? How did you do it? What did you find? Why are your outcomes important? And it's good to include a short bibliography because, as I explained before, with the keywords for your poem and for the summary, in using maybe some books you might be referring to, it just helps us to have a better idea of where your thinking's at and where you hope your work will go. And so that helps us make decisions before we send our work through to the design team to start working, because as you probably realise, for people who are familiar with Coolamon, artwork is very, very much a part of the journal. Okay, so
The risk
please
of
go ahead.
dominating some time, Cecily, can you just expand point 3?
Point 3. Well, how did you do it? Look, these are just general questions. They're not specific questions. That's why we recommend, please get on to Google and go for your life and open up your own ideas. But, well, it could be how you and others do it. Like, so what's your paper about? Why is it important? How did you do it? Well, let me use an example. In our last edition, one of the authors who did an academic article spoke about his paper as being, okay, my paper is about the desert tradition, but I'm bringing it together with work I'm already working on. So to make it align to Coolamon and make it align to Coolamon's goals, what he did was bring his own knowledge he'd been developing and with the desert tradition and bring those together. So he said why it was important. It was important to him personally, but he felt he could contribute. And how he did it was by bringing his present work that he was working on academically together with the spiritual desert tradition of the Desert Fathers. And then he said why what he found by getting them to dialogue with one another. And we always bring something new forward. When we're bringing things into dialogue, our own knowledge, accumulated knowledge, and trying to work with perhaps material that you normally wouldn't work with, you'll always bring forward something new. That's been my experience. I think the rest of the Rena and Barry would probably agree with me wholeheartedly on this. And this is what makes it so exciting.
I'm just thinking, oh, sorry, Cecily, please keep going.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is part of the writing process that as our article grows, we grow. We grow spiritually, we grow psychically, we grow emotionally, and it can be a very exciting journey to bring our work into dialogue with others and produce something that you went, oh, wow, I'm surprised at that.
I was just thinking to add with academic articles in it, I mean, it might not be a user-friendly word, but it might be one that people are familiar with nevertheless when it comes to academic writing, is sort of the methodology. So how did you do it? Just to re-put it a different way from what Cecily has said, you know, it's kind of to talk about the methodology behind how you have structured or composed or drawn your conclusions within an academic framework. So something along those lines with regards to methodology.
Thanks, Rena. That's putting it very succinctly. Yes, methodology is a word that covers how did you do it. So,
next slide, Cecily.
Sorry, what was that? Next slide.
Next slide.
Yes, please. And I notice we've got a couple of, just before we move on, somebody asked how many words for an abstract, and I've got there 150 to 300 words. And I think someone asked about a reflective essay, and I think that's about 100 to 200 words, but we'll go through that again when we just finish this part of our presentation here today.
Sure.
So next slide, yes, thank you. And this is just a little bit more information for those who would like it. Basically, there's two different types of abstracts. If you're doing academic article, there's a descriptive one and there's an informative one. We're not likely to see an informative one so much in Coolamon, though it's not impossible, particularly if people have done some data and they've got some really good information that would help with spiritual direction or so it's not out of the picture, but mostly we do descriptive abstracts, which are about the major points of what you've done, what you're working on, and a bit about the background, purpose, and the focus. But we never mention the methods, results, and conclusions in this in a descriptive abstract. And this form, as it says, and I've been indicating, is most likely used for humanities and social science or psychology essays, although psychology essays actually also can be an informative abstract too, because they often use quantitative data. So there's probably a difference. The left-hand side, the descriptive abstract, is about quality, about qualitative, whereas the informative is about quantitative data, how much, who did what, how many people did so and so. So, yes. I think it's time for the next slide now, Rena, thanks. So this is an example of a descriptive abstract. And this is about, so this one's not 300 words long, but you don't need 300 words on this slide because it's a bit hard to read. So I've picked out one that's short and easy to, because the main point that I wanted to bring forward here is about using phrases in your abstract that highlight or enhance. So you can see these are highlighted, that you might use the phrase that the article is bringing forward possibilities of hope, and while also illuminating areas, and it can provide insights, and it makes this happen, and it provides that, and it provides that. So let's just say a little bit more about these. So these are really phrases that you can retranslate. So instead of saying this study, you might say this paper is going to provide new possibilities of thinking or whatever it is, and while also highlighting this, this, and this, or while bringing forward this, this, and this. So, and it can provide insights, or it can provide whatever it's going to provide. And you'll notice the last three phrases are to make, to provide, to provide. So what this I want to bring forward here is that the difference between expressions of interest and abstracts. Expressions of interest are about hope, whereas a descriptive abstract is about contribution. So the contribution that you're making. Just stopping there for a second, does anyone have anything, or they need a clarification here? Okay, so just recommending again that you please do Google researches, but phrases are really useful for helping you pull together a compelling. So this is about a compelling abstract, a compelling piece of writing. And it's compelling because you're letting us know how this contributes to whatever you're wanting to contribute to. Whereas the expressions of interest are about your hopes and your dreams and how you see the world. I think we might be ready for the next slide now, Rena. So I think that sort of brings to a conclusion my contribution to this webinar. So Barry or Rena, did you want to add anything at this point?
I'm just wondering if I stop share here, so we can all just sort of come together as a group, so we're not just thumbnails down the side, and just make it a little bit more of a easier space to perhaps have a chat into. I'll just do that now. But yeah, we've really just wanted to take this opportunity also to hear from you or any questions. But I just feel to recap on what Cecily has done is really just to emphasise that EOIs and abstracts are sort of mini genres unto themselves, and I'm speaking from my own personal thinking here, that it can be tempting to think that they're just, oh, I just need to get that done. They're just like little tiny things, insignificant little things. I'll just flip that off. But they're actually really kind of critical mini genres that sharpen our thinking and really make us think strongly about the piece we're intending to contribute. So I think they're kind of fantastic tools for planning and prepping and sharpening our thinking. And then you get a crystal clear little map of it down on paper that then allows us to see where you're really genuinely and deeply going. And then it helps our planning, and it helps us to give some initial feedback, because this is all part of, working out the edition and who's going to go in this edition or who might be held over to other editions. So it allows us to give some really good feedback as well. And running behind everything that Cecily has said, I just want to emphasise it, and Cecily's already been across this, but just to emphasise that at the back of your mind, you've kind of also got the theme of the next edition in mind, because as far as my own writing experience goes, we kind of are working with the knowledge and experiences that we have accrued and accumulated. But the beauty of a theme that a journal pitches allows us then to think of our knowledge in a different way, or put a different spin on it, or take it in a slightly different direction. So yeah, behind all of the thinking and all of the planning is also the theme, to keep that in mind as well. So, but I'll just stop there, and Barry, you might have some things to say, and then from the floor, any questions.
Well, I'm not sure if anyone's interested, but I've been writing an abstract for an article. It's sort of part reflective, part academic, because I'm looking at specific biblical interpretations. And I'm still in the process of trying to refine it. It's probably a bit longer, but I was wondering if people would like me just to read it to give an idea of what I'm thinking of at the moment, a work in progress. Do you have any objections? Do you think that's applicable, Cecily?
Oh, absolutely, Barry. Love it. Please.
Okay. Well, I've written it this way. It says, this article is a reflective piece, although it has an academic background, specifically the study of Scripture. It is written from a Christian's perspective, so reference to the Christian scriptures is predominant, although there is significant connection to the Hebrew Bible, as well as fleeting references to the Quran of Islam and to Buddhist thought. The purpose of the piece is to assist spiritual directors and other interested persons to develop their own spirituality in a way and with language suitable for 21st century understandings, both for their own benefit and for that of those whom they companion. The hope is that modes of consciousness will be raised to a sufficient level to permit greater access to spiritual growth. The basic premise of the article is that as being sourced by being itself, we are known before we are born. The purpose of life then is for us to reconnect with the source of all being, but to achieve that destiny as a greatly developed person through choice and experience. The method, mode, and direction we use and the level of maturity we finally attain result also from the many choices we make along the way. The example used is the growth pattern of Jesus of Nazareth as developed in the first chapter of the Gospel of Mark. The author's hope is that the reflecting on these ideas will take the readers beyond what is possible for the power of the mind to think, to know, and to understand, to that wisdom which is the catalyst for true spiritual growth. So that's that.
Thanks, Barry. That's it's really useful to see a work in progress and to have a work in progress. Yes, thanks, Jude. Yes.
I'm thinking to ask you, Barry, sort of at what stage did you write the abstract? Like, in a way, I'm thinking sometimes people start and they write the abstract first. Sometimes the abstract gets written last. So a little bit more about that part of the journey would be great.
Well, I wrote it last. I tend to start writing and keep writing, and then I refine and refine and refine, come back, change. So I can't possibly write the abstract beforehand. That's not me. So I wait until afterwards, and then I refine that. So that I think is a bit too long. It also hasn't mentioned what is edgy about the work that may be contained in that for the next journal to see if that would be acceptable. But yeah, so the process is really, as I go on, it just becomes richer, denser, more focused. The directions tend to come out, and so I find I'm writing. It takes on a life of its own. So therefore, then when I do the abstract, hopefully I get some of that, saying what was going on here. It helps me too.
I think that's really important to hear that side of it, because with our timeline with Coolamon, I think we're asking for EOIs and abstracts. We're thinking that some planning will have been done, maybe some preliminary writing might be done, and then you'll send in the abstract for us, and then we can go, oh yeah, no, please keep going, you know, or give some feedback. And then the final draft doesn't come in until April. So I think it's timely, and especially listening to how Barry writes in the part of in the timeline where he writes his abstract, that it's okay for you to change your abstracts by the time the final draft comes in. So it's just to facilitate your thinking and our thinking. And if at the end, when you've got your polished draft together, you think, gosh, this needs quite a different abstract altogether, that's completely fine.
Yes, I love the point, Barry, you make of it taking a life of its own, and this is crucial to writing, substantial writing, that it does take on. You know, it's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing, because it means, you know, that you and the spirit are working together on this article. In fact, if it's not there, I would be a bit concerned as an author, as a writer. I would be concerned if I don't see that it starts to begin to take on a life of its own, because as I said, it's part of our development, our spiritual growth, everything we write, everything we do, and that our spiritual growth can actually be accelerated and enhanced when we take on board that very seriously, that there is a life in what we're doing, and that we're not just wandering. It's the spirit working with us to bring us to a new point in our understanding and in our realization, because what you're writing isn't for you, it's for the readers. You know, there's two stages when we write. We have to write for ourselves to even understand ourselves. You know, what is it we're trying to do? Particularly when it starts to wander, we've really got to, so we start that first abstract, and then it starts to go around and develop a bit and go in different parts. And yeah, so then that's stage one, when we're writing to understand ourselves. Stage two is when we start to think, well, what does this, how will this be read? How will the reader see it? And just coming back to your point, Barry, about the abstract you're developing, what came through strongly to me when I was listening was your contribution, how you saw this would contribute. So yes, while you mentioned the word hope, but it wasn't the main focus. So this is the difference between the reflective and the abstract, that while both might mention the word hope, but the academic abstract actually is intentionally making a contribution to either spiritual direction or to some body of knowledge around that, or spirituality itself. So it'd be lovely now to hear from people.
Rena, could you please clarify that? Sorry, Rena, could you please clarify that process you're suggesting about drafts and feedback and so forth? Just clarify the steps of that, please.
Yeah, and I've got it on a slide coming up as well, and it will be it's available on the internet, and I'll email it out to you as well. It's available on our Coolamon webpage. But the EOIs and abstracts are coming in. The deadline is the 25th of February. I have got that right, but with the slide, I'll have that shortly. So end of February. And that gives us an indication of how many poems we've got coming in, how many reflective articles, how many academic articles, etc. That we start to think about the balance and the order and checking for alignment with the theme. And then we will be able to give some feedback, which I imagine will just be through March. We'll feedback positive comments, etc. And then the final deadline for the polished piece is then April. And I think that's Friday, the 15th of April. And then it goes through a blind review process. So all of the submissions are sent out to 2 people anonymously. Authors are anonymous, reviewers are anonymous, and we glean some feedback from that. And then there's a phase where authors and editors work together where is needed to develop the piece even a little bit more as per the feedback and things like that. So, and Noel, if you were at the last webinar, I'm not sure if you were there, but we really work hard to cultivate a really rich rapport with authors, and really about synergy and just seeing if the piece can even be lifted anymore. And then it's signed off, the full manuscript is then sent on to the design team, and they work their magic. But they've already been able to do a couple of months of prepping of the material that's come in via the abstracts right from the start. So it speeds up the process for them. So, but that's about it, Noel, if that's, I hope it's not as clear as mud.
No, very clear, thanks.
Great.
So perhaps we might ask for a little bit of feedback on what you've heard so far. Would be really useful for us. Was it helpful? How could you have known more, etc., etc. So please, over to you now.
Thanks, Cecily. It's Ros here. Thanks for
Hi,
what
Ros.
you've contributed. Yeah, as someone who's not submitted anything to a journal, it's really helpful for me to understand about the process and the difference between expression of interest and abstract. So thanks very much for that. I guess I had one question which relates a bit to the theme. I have something I'd like to submit, but I'm not quite sure whether it really fits in with the theme that for the next journal. And I just wondered, is it okay to submit that, perhaps with some thoughts about how it might fit, but then to seek kind of feedback from the editorial team about whether it might be suitable or whether it might be better to hold it for a later, theme. Yeah.
Well, that's what we're all about, Ros. We're all about supporting authors at whatever stage you may be coming in or thinking about writing. So, and we delight in helping, getting together and developing your thinking, working with you. So yeah, please do that. Send it in, say, look, this is how I'm thinking, blah, blah, blah. Not sure if it aligns, and we can go, oh yes, it could align this way or that way, So thanks, it'd be great to hear from you.
I have a question. Yes, thank you too for all the guidelines. It was very useful looking at the difference between the expressions of interest and abstract. Mine relates to I've not submitted as either before, and it seems mine would probably fit into a reflective piece. But within that, I have poems, including a midrash, as well as possibly some artwork that sort of fit within the reflective piece. So I have a couple of questions about that in terms of the editorial process. I think I'm pretty not wishing to have feedback on my poems as such, and I didn't know where it appears that the editors would be taking a poem as a thing to edit, from what I hear. I'm not sure, or whether it's the reflective piece that I'm more than happy to have people edit my writing and form that. But when it comes to a poem, for example, I treat those like my artwork, where I wouldn't have somebody saying, oh, that word there is not quite right. It would be equivalent to me saying, no, I don't like that colour in that corner. Can you paint that differently? I just, had some clarification on that process of editing if poetry is submitted.
And I've got to assure you, is it Devasha or Devasha?
Yeah.
Devasha. Okay, Devasha, I can assure you we don't edit as in you send and we change. It's a process of working together, because what we're really interested in is actually publishing your work. However, there's a certain standard that it has to meet, and it doesn't mean, so we work together and we make suggestions only. And the suggestions are that, yes, this is at a publishable point for us, because it mightn't be that it's suitable. It might be suitable for another type of publication somewhere else. And we also give suggestions if it's not suitable, you could publish here or you could publish there. So editing, we don't edit. We don't touch people's work without their permission. So it's really a collaboration. It's a collaborative work that we do with authors to support them. And if you don't like our suggestions, you don't have to follow it. So what I'm sort of saying is our suggestions generally come from the point of view of what's publishable in Coolamon.
Sure. And so to clarify, you will offer suggestions if you think, for example, a poem could be written differently.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
come in there on that.
Because
with one that I was editing for the last, and the reviewer thought that a stanza switch, and I looked at that and I thought, yeah, this to me seems stronger, using the same words but just switching the order of the stanzas. So we suggested that to the poet, and she looked at it and said, oh yes. So that actually was incorporated, and I think it did make the work stronger. But she could have looked at it and said, oh no, and it was of publishable standard, so it would have gone in that way. But yeah, we look at things and make suggestions, but you don't, as Cecily said, you don't have to take them. If not taking it means that it is not publishable in form, well then it won't be published. But it's not an ultimatum, it's
no, and I think
very much a collaboration.
Yeah, I think because I'm not a writer as such, I now would call myself an artist and a painter, and I think some of my poems have come from just a place, and to put in context too, I'm considering contributing as a spiritual directee, a reflective piece, how much you guys in spiritual direction on the edge have filled my life with hope, and the outpouring and the examples, and through a multitude. And I've recently read Sally Longley's books, and just a journey through that and what's come from that, to share the incredible power that you guys have, and sharing of the divine, and bring hope and what has come out from that. So there's an element where I'm not necessarily like, if I submit a painting, I wouldn't want somebody to give me some suggestions of how that would be different when it's a product of stuff. but it's making me think about what I would submit and what I wouldn't, because it's not about, it needs to be published, and it's a incredible piece of poetry rather than it was an outcome of some spiritual direction in the form of a poem. And to even swap stanzas because from where it came from, it's not about that. But it'd be fine to say, I wouldn't be hurt to say, oh, no, that's not suitable for our journal or publishable. I'd rather that than, oh, if you swap this and made this a little bit like that because it was something that was created through a process kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Devasha, you also raise a really good point there that shows how important your initial abstract is, and how important, like particularly with poems and that, your keywords and your description, because we've got that as a guide for us to what you're thinking and what you're trying to achieve.
Yes.
Does that make sense? So that
yes.
So that it's not just about helping us as a team, editorial team, it's about how we can support you, because we know your initial thinking. We have some description of what led to you writing that poem, so that any guidance that we offer can be offered in a good spirit that honours your work, honours your impetus for writing, and honours the experience that you've had.
Yes.
The suggestion comes really with, see, what's in your head has to get into our heads. And the medium is the word, the written word. And so how successful that is happening, an editor will look at it and say, is this something that we're getting, that the audience of our magazine or journal will be getting? If it's not, then the editor might suggest something that says, well, we think it'd be sharper or able to be perceived better, and suggest it. Now, if it's something like you said about a poem that's come from the experience, it really isn't going to be changed. It's not about that. Well, you say that. And as Cecily said, if that's sort of in the abstract, well, we've got it first, you know. Another point I might make with artwork is that if you look at the last journal, the artwork was done by a design team, and it flows through the journal. And actually the colours morphed from quite black into greys and into colour as it went through the journal. So if you are submitting an artwork, you really would need to think about that, or be prepared to take some advice from the design team, because it has to fit with this particular work. Now, as a valid piece of art that you're doing, you know, there's no question it's your artwork, but to fit within a journal, you have to realize that it has to fit in the journals.
Right, thank you. And it's just clarification, I guess, because I'd been asked to contribute a particular piece of art and writing and just seeing whether that fits. And I have had a look, and I ordered the last hard copy and looked through. You're right, there's a theme of artwork through, and it might not necessarily fit to have a different artwork here and a poem here and a reflection around that. It might, so that's answered my question, so I can do it differently, and it's answered.
We'll certainly try to make it work. There's you know, we're collaborating with you, but it's not a matter of just saying right out. Sometimes in other countries you get that, but we don't.
Yeah, and I think, yes, I just until now didn't really understand that process, but it's more clear to me, so what direction I work it towards or not. Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to offer it into the mix as well, to recap on what Cecily had said earlier about the writing process, when first we're writing for us and then we are writing for others. And I think, say, to take your poem as an example, that maybe one version of the poem could be one way, and then a different version of the poem could be a different way. And I think, you know, and this is just a blanket general statement, and I know this as myself as a writer, when I know what I want to say, and then to get the feedback from others, the initial response is, no, I don't want to change this. And I think what I would encourage, and because of the size of our editorial team and that we draw in reviewers, is that we really encourage authors to hear other perspectives on how it is being received, because there is usually flexibility there, and it means that your message could even be put across in a different way, depending on how it is being received. So I think, and it's been a growing skill for me, is to be much more flexible with my pieces, and to really listen and take on board and process, and not necessarily always go with, but listen to the experiences of others with my work, and then going, oh, okay, yeah, I can imagine that maybe that's confusing, or that's not being conveyed in the way that it might be. So, but as Barry said, it's about negotiation, liaising, rapport, synergy, and really respecting. We really respect authors' works. We don't get in there with the red pen, so to speak.
If I could mention that example, I was at Oxford in Wadham College, and the road next around was where J.R. Tolkien lived. And the story is that it's quite a narrow roadway with houses along the footpath, no gardens. But he would come down at the end of each chapter he wrote on The Hobbit, and the local kids would gather around and he'd read it to them. And then, depending on what their reaction was and what they said to him, he'd go back and alter it.
Oh, that's a lovely story. Thanks, Barry. That's really encouraging. And Jude, I noticed you had your hand up, that you've got a question. That'd be lovely to hear, or feedback, whatever you've got. Yes?
Yeah. I think, thank you, Devasha. And I can't remember the previous commenter, who's also, like me, a new person trying to get our feelings, our thoughts around this. I've just really benefited from that last part of the conversation, and thinking about something of, for me, what the heart of Devasha's questions and your responses are about the vulnerability of writing. And I have a piece that I can bring. If I tweak it this way, it's reflective, and there's more vulnerability. There's more of myself being exposed, if you will. I can hide behind my academic side, but Cecily, you spoke about the way spirit works, and the process we put ourselves through, and sometimes think, why would I do this? So there's something here about the potency, the vulnerability, the challenges of writing and choosing to let our words, our images, ourselves be seen. And I guess as the conversation has gone into this tangent, it's really showing how important trust and relationship. And I guess if I could play a little bit, Barry, the idea that if we were reading in Hobbiton, in a safe and lovely world, if we were reading with children, and that sense perhaps if Coolamon is a safe place to all be children showing work, it may be a way to address some of the vulnerabilities of that. So I think, I don't know, just Devasha, thank you for saying things that helped me to realise there's the details and process of how Coolamon, how your process works. There's also what it costs as a writer. And also I was just thinking of how valuable what you may be choosing to share with people. And it's fair enough, Devasha, that you would consider, is this the gift that I want to bring, and how will it be received? Rena, I thought that was really sound advice, that perhaps to know what is treasured and private for our use, and to know what can be brought forward. And I guess discussion like this is a really healthy way to do that, because we're not isolated and trying to work these questions out alone. So that's kind of a summary, a thank you, how your information, Cecily, Barry and Rena, that you're sharing is colliding with the inner process as well, that is perhaps harder to satisfy than deadlines. So yeah.
Oh, thanks so
Something
much.
about the vulnerability of doing it.
Thanks so much for your sharing, Jude. When we are, the editorial team are all published, you know, we're published authors, and we know the internal trauma and grind about getting feedback from editors, and we also know that it can be extraordinarily brutal, and we absolutely want to be the complete opposite of that. And we know that getting feedback on our work from really trusted people is so imperative to the development of the piece, and we want to be like that for other authors. That's what we want. We want that trust, and we want that synergy and that capacity to let pieces grow when we can share them and not work in isolation. So thanks, Jude. That's really lovely. Thank you.
The thought I had when you were speaking, Jude, was that reminded me of, I'm a member of a Catholic teaching order, and our Superior General came out from America some time ago, only American we've had. And he said in his baseball voice, "Hey, brothers," he said, "I want you to remember you're not teaching subjects, you're teaching boys." And that stayed with me. So the same with our editorial process. In a way, we're not so much interacting with an article or a piece or a poem where you are the important person we're interacting with, and with great respect. And the love, which I understand as love, is listening deeply to the heart of the other. It's actually obedience of audience, listening as deep as the heart. But instead of having people obedient to us, we'd like to be obedient to you. So it's a different focus.
Thanks, Barry. And we've only got a couple of minutes, Rena, I think. Perhaps people might like to say, who want to jump in, please do so at this point. So, Rena, I think maybe it's time that we begin the closing thoughts.
Yes.
And information.
So I've just got this last slide here, but I will send out a little email to you with that's the link on the side, just to the Coolamon page, where the guidelines are, and in the guidelines are the genres and word counts, etc. And the dates are here for, or the information on the theme at the top there, and then the dates to have abstracts and EOIs in by the end of February, and then the final submission deadline for the polished piece, which will then still go through, the reviewer stage, etc., is the 15th of April. So, but I'll email that out to you, and where you can get that on the internet as well. So, Barry, you were going to just do the final words of thanks and close for us.
Okay, what I've done, I've lifted a prayer from the Carmina Gadelica, 1,000-year-old Celtic prayer, because the Celts lived with a spirituality that was, which was all day. The spiritual and the physical were one. As Jesus of Nazareth said in the Christian tradition, then the Father and I are one, but he also meant I as a human being. So this prayer, I've modified it a bit to make it a bit more modern and perhaps more all-encompassing than just the Christian tradition, as trying to get something at what we're about as spiritual directors and spiritual people. Creator spirit, source of all being, sun behind all suns, soul behind all souls. Show to us in everything we touch and in everyone we meet the continued assurance of your presence round us, in us, and through us, lest ever we should think you absent. In all created things, you are there. In every friend we have, the sunshine of your presence is shone forth. In every enemy that seems to cross our path, you are there within the cloud to challenge us to love. Show to us the glory in the grey. Awake for us your presence in the very storm, till all our joys are seen as you and all our trivial tasks emerge as unifying sacraments in the universal temple of your love. Amen.
Thanks so much, Barry. And brings us to a close, everyone. Please look out for my email to you. And if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to contact me on that email as well. So go well today, stay safe, and we'll look forward to your abstracts and EOIs by the end of the month.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Bless. Bye.